The Ministry's mission is to secure public health, to upgrade the quality of life for all Singaporeans, to foster an inclusive society, and to ensure Singapore's resilience in the long term, the very long term. You know, as a doctor, I'm always reminded that actually it is the engineers and the staff of PUB and NEA that have saved far more lives through the provision of clean water, modern sanitation, clean air, safe food, and public hygiene. These staff save far more lives than doctors like me curing patients in a hospital. And this is something which we should not take for granted, and I hope members of the House, and in fact members of the public, will also give due recognition to all these engineers, all these staff, all these cleaners who work so assiduously to protect our environment and ultimately protect our welfare. I believe it's worthwhile spending a few moments contemplating the key principles behind all the work of the ministry. First, our primary concern is really the welfare of human beings. I know many people talk about protecting Mother Earth, protecting the environment, but let me be quite frank. The Earth will survive human beings, no matter what we do to it. What is at greater risk is human beings and the welfare of human beings. So really, human beings are both responsible for protecting the environment as well as exquisitely vulnerable to the damage that we cause to the environment. The point I'm making is that we do all this for the sake of ourselves. When we protect the environment, we're protecting ourselves and our children. The second key principle is that we are all in this together. This is ultimate democracy. We all breathe the same air, drink the same water, eat the same food, are susceptible to the same dengue or leptospirosis or all the other diseases which are environmentally susceptible to. So the point is that we are all equal before the environment, and in fact one very gratifying point is that I'm glad that in this House there's been bipartisan support for the work of this ministry. The third principle is that we have to think long term. For water, for waste, in fact for all the major infrastructural projects of our ministry, we think 50 years and beyond. And we have to make long-term investments, and we cannot just kick the can down the road. Allow me now to address some of the specific issues which members have highlighted. We set very high environmental standards for Singapore, not because this is an ideological obsession or because it's fashionable, but because this is an obligation in the governance of a dense city-state. Paying attention to the environment is an investment in our future and our health. Even our economic viability depends on it. For instance, our high-quality environment is a key competitive strength. It is the reason why companies and people decide to base their families and situate their headquarters in this safe, secure, livable, and lovable city called Singapore. So it is not a trade-off between the economy and the environment. In fact, it is a virtuous cycle. May I just show some slides on the LED? A clean environment starts with the air we breathe. I know we often take this for granted, but when you start experiencing scenes, which fortunately these are all scenes from, the first one is on the volcanic eruption in Iceland. I remember that because I got stuck in London. I couldn't fly for a few days as a result of that. The other scene you will recognize is the smog in Beijing. We quibble here about PSI being 10 or 20. Over there, you're talking about PSI of 500. So you know it, you appreciate it when you miss it. Mr. Charles Chong and Mr. Nicholas Fang asked about measures to improve air quality. And last August, we announced that Singapore will adopt new air quality targets pegged to the more stringent WHO air quality guidelines by 2020. You will notice from this slide that actually we have not yet reached those targets. And that's why we need to step up our game, and that's why we need to enhance standards. So for instance, in order to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions, MTI and MEWR are jointly working with the major emitters, and as Mr. Nicholas Fang has said, in fact, there are only 6 suspects in the room as far as sulfur dioxide is concerned. And so we're working directly with the power generators as well as the oil refineries, to improve their processes, to invest in appropriate technology. And quite frankly, technological solutions are available. It's a matter of cost and viability. And in the case of the electricity generating companies, the switch to natural gas has been a big benefit for the environment. We are also concerned about fine particulate matter, in particular what we call PM2.5, smaller than 2.5 microns. The paradox here is, in fact, it is the stuff that you don't see that is more dangerous, because PM2.5 is inhaled deeply into the lungs, embedded in those tissues, and often never leaves our bodies. The vehicles account for 57% of all PM2.5 that we have in Singapore. We have progressively tightened standards for diesel vehicles for the past 6 years, and we will next impose Euro 5 standards for all new diesel vehicles with effect from 1st January 2014. I think Mr. Charles Chong asked for the percentage of Euro 5 compliant vehicles that are currently on the road. It's very small. There are only about 3,400 such vehicles. But over the years to come, we hope with these new standards in place, the fleet will gradually be replaced. Speaking of replacement of the fleet, we currently have 38,000 very old diesel commercial vehicles of pre-Euro or pre-Euro 1 emission standards. You see, commercial diesel vehicles have a statutory lifespan of 20 years. So that means they actually have a very long tail. The Ministry of Transport and my ministry will be implementing an early turnover scheme which will incentivize the owners of these old commercial diesel vehicles to retire them early and to upgrade them to vehicles that meet the new Euro 5 emission standards. We will provide more details of this scheme within the next 2 months. We also need to deal with motorcycles. There are more than 143,000 motorcycles in Singapore, and most of them are of Euro 1 standard. We will be raising the emission standards for all new motorcycles to the Euro 3 standards with effect from 1st October 2014. And these new motorcycles will emit less than a fifth of the pollutants compared to the current fleet. Finally, we also need to address air pollution from beyond our shores, as Mr. Nicholas Fang and Mr. Charles Chong have emphasized. This is a chronic, recurrent problem. And as I've said before, in fact, this is a commercial problem. It is cheaper, unfortunately, for oil plantation owners to clear land by burning forests. And unfortunately, a lot of this land is on peatland, which continues to burn subterranean for weeks or months thereafter. Working with our fellow ministers and ministries in ASEAN, we're trying to put pressure on the companies by the use of technologies such as digital georeference concession maps and satellite and other mapping technologies so that ultimately we can name and shame the culprits for engaging in such anti-environment and anti-social activities. Let me now turn to the ABC Waters program. I totally agree with Dr. Teo Ho Pin. This has been a program which has been very welcomed by members of the public. We've gained access to our reservoirs. We have converted canals into riverine attractions in their own right. I will take his suggestions about improving car parking, toilets, and facilities, and catering specifically to different segments of our population, the seniors, the children, as well as the long-distance joggers we will make sure that we will interconnect these ABC, what I call blue ribbons of water, with the National Green Park Connector Network, so that you will be able to have access throughout the island. You can run many marathons along these routes. We have completed 20 projects so far, but the good news is that, in fact, we have identified about 100 sites that could potentially be developed over the next 15 to 20 years. Now, I'm not saying we can do all 100, but I'm saying that there is potential to do many more sites. The ABC's program has encouraged new lifestyle activities in many of our waterways and the surrounding lands, such as the Sengkang Floating Wetlands Project at the Punggol Reservoir and the urban wetlands at the Alexandra Canal. PUB will continue to work with PUB on more of such projects, including mega projects like the Bishan Toa Payoh Park. I am pleased to update Mr. Heng Chi Hao, who's asked, obviously, for his own constituency, that PUB will explore another ABC project along the stretch between the Whampoa Drive and Kim Kiat Road, taking into account the opportunities that will open up when there are new developments, such as the new HDB project opposite the Whampoa Community Club. So you'll have stuff to do. If I can just show, there are 3 more ABC projects which are due for completion later this year. That's Sungai Pandan, the Sungai Lupandan, and the Geylang River. And construction will begin another 5 projects in Sungai Tampines, Sungai Api Api, the Kallang River next to St. Andrew's School, and Siglap Canal. Between 2014 and 2017, construction will commence on new projects at the Kallang Riverside and the Jurong Lake. Let me now move to a topic which Engineer Lee Biwa, Mr. Gan Kiam Po, Mr. Liang, and indeed many members of this House have focused on. And there's something close to our hearts, actually more accurately, closer to our stomachs, hawker centers. They are a source of livelihood for our hawkers and a space where all Singaporeans have access to delicious, freshly cooked food at affordable prices. We started off as a hygiene project to move mobile hawkers with no running water and questionable sanitation into centers where you have running water in order to improve public hygiene. But over the years, hawker centers have become part of our uniquely Singapore identity. And the fact that we can go there in slippers and shorts and t-shirts, it reflects the informality of life in Singapore. And the fact that all of us, including politicians on both sides of the House, go to hawker centers to meet people, also reflects that multicultural cohesion and that uniqueness of Singapore life the way it is today. So hawker centers are an essential part of social infrastructure. More than 55% of our cooked food hawkers today currently pay subsidized rates. What this means is that these are the original hawkers or their immediate family members who have inherited the practice from them. And they were, as I said earlier, resettled from the original mobile stalls. The more recent hawkers, that means the other 45%, are people who've come in later, or in the decades since then. And one question then is, on what basis do you allocate these stalls? The newcomers have been allocated stalls on the basis of open tenders in the interest of fairness. Their rents, therefore, vary according to location. So, for instance, if you're going to bid for a stall in Newton Hawker Centre or Maxwell, it's going to be much higher than a stall, say, in Taman Jurong or one elsewhere. It varies according to location, food type, traffic, size, frontage, and business conditions overall. In 2011, we announced that after a hiatus of 26 years, we would restart the hawker center building program. And we showed, I announced, I believe, there should be 10 dots there where the new hawker centers will be. And in case you ask me why, on what basis we chose those dots, those were areas which were relatively underserved with respect to cooked food. My objective of restarting this program and injecting supply was to put downward pressure on rentals. And in addition to that, in addition to the fact that there's new supply coming on, we also changed policy. So, for instance, we removed reserve rents, and this has led to falling tender prices. 55% of the stalls awarded in the past 1 year were awarded at below their previous reserve rents. And successful tenders as low as $21 for a cooked food stall at Taman Jurong and $5 for a market stall at Changi Village have emerged. That said, I want to make this point, that rent is only one component of the hawker's operating costs. In fact, raw materials and cost of labor are higher component costs of a hawker center. And rents are important, but not the key game. In fact, I went to check on the vegetarian bee hoon that Mr. Peng Eng Huat highly recommended. I went there yesterday. Unfortunately, it was closed at 2. But I then did research. I identified 9 other vegetarian bee hoon stalls along Jalan Bukit Merah. And guess what? The 2 stalls selling it at $150 are paying market rates. The 3 stalls who are enjoying subsidized rent are charging more than that. I think it makes the point that rental is important but not the key determinant of prices. Ultimately, hawkers will charge what they think the market will bear and to reach out to the volume of work that they are aiming for. But besides the rent policy, we also changed rules on subletting and assignment because we wanted hawkers to personally operate the stalls. And we will uphold this principle even as we pilot new not-for-profit management models. I think Mr. Seah Kian Peng in his budget speech gave a very eloquent explanation for the special role of cooperatives like the NTU Seafood Fair, and I can't add to what you have already said. But having said that, I want to say that Food Fair will not have a monopoly on the new hawker centres, and in fact, I hope to see several different not-for-profit operators enter this space. But NEA will continue to be the regulator, the developer, and exercise oversight over all hawker centres in Singapore. And I'm pleased to inform Engineer Lee that the planning works on the 10 new hawker centres. 5 of them will be completed between 2015 to 2016 or thereabouts, including the one at Yishun. So it'll be on time, don't worry. Mr. Seah has also asked for an update on wet markets, I think. That was in his earlier speech. The new hawker centres like the one at Bukit Panjang will have a wet market selling fresh produce. But I want to caution here that whilst I'm very confident that there's a demand for cooked food, the demand patterns for wet markets is not so clear-cut. So this is something which we will evolve as time goes on, and we will respond according to demand. Let me now touch on another point which I think Engineer Lee brought up, the nearly 2,000 hawkers who bought their sole stalls about 20 years ago. Their leases are coming to an end over the next few years. All of these centres will continue to operate after the leases expire. There may need to be a short period where we do refurbishments, renovations, or redevelopments, but I will ensure that there will be centres. All stallholders who are interested in to continue their businesses will have the option to do so. And in fact, stallholders who were previously on the subsidised scheme, I intend to place them back on the subsidised scheme, and they will only pay the current subsidised rental rates. For those who were not previously subsidised stallholders, I will give them the option to continue, but they will pay the prevailing market rate. In other words, I'm doing my best to ensure that we are fair to everyone concerned and that these centres will continue. They will continue on a not-for-profit basis, and hopefully residents will continue to patronise them and enjoy the options, the food options that they provide. Let me quickly move on to water. Water is an existential issue for us, and that's why the 2 water agreements were part of the separation agreement that marks our independence as a nation. And we have obsessed about water for 5 decades, and our water story is one of political will, meticulous planning, long-term planning, technology innovation, and sound economics. And finally, today we have the 4 national taps, and we are in a secure position. I can give assurance to this House, we will certainly be water independent well before the expiry of the last agreement with Malaysia. I can even go further than that and assure Ms. Faizal Jama that, in fact, water is not going to be the limiting factor. You can produce as many babies as you like. You can build as many houses as you like. Water will not be the limiting factor. We can continue to produce more than enough water for Singapore for the long-term future. We will be commencing on the second big desalination plant in Tuas will be ready in July this year, and that will add another 70 million gallons of water per day to our capacity. In the long run, desalination will meet about 25% of our water demand. We are also commencing on the phase 2 of our deep tunnel sewage system, and you can see that's marked out in red. This is a superhighway for used water that will drain water from the western part of the island to a new water reclamation plant in Tuas, which will also produce new water in the future. I would also just quickly address this point on the cost of water and the need for water conservation. I agree that water needs to be correctly priced to reflect its scarcity value. and it needs to facilitate long-term investments in this sector. There is a need, therefore, to constantly invest, and the key variable in the future for the cost of water is the cost of energy. So I cannot predict what the future cost of water will be without knowing what the cost of energy will be. But what I can say is that on our current trajectory and with the hard work that's been done by PUB, there is no need to raise water prices this year. So you don't need to look too worried, Mr. Lau. Now let me move on to waste, which I think Ms. Faisal Jamal has raised. We have made some changes. We have reduced the number of public waste collection sectors from 9 to 6 in order to improve economies of scale. Again, I'm trying to bring the cost of the waste collection down, whilst recognizing that the cost of energy, cost of transport, trucks and all that is also going up. We are also building a new waste-to-energy incineration plant in order to maximize resource recovery and to reduce landfill space. If I could show the picture of Pulau Semakau, you will see that we've already got the area marked out called Phase 2. And again, I can give this House the assurance that we are good to go for another 50 years and beyond. So we're not going to run out of space. But in fact, the beauty about Pulau Semakau is that we are probably the only landfill in the world that's a tourist attraction. And in fact, just last December, PM himself went there. If you go to his Facebook page, you'll find some beautiful pictures of that site. So the point is that it can be done, it will be there for the long term, and it can be beautiful at the same time. Dr. Teo asked about water and energy, I think efficiency, and on an update on the Energy Conservation Act. This act requires large energy users to implement energy management practices. It will come into effect in April this year for the industry sector, and it will be rolled out into the transport sector subsequently. So we will continue to work with companies. We will continue to incentivize them and provide schemes like the Grant for Energy Efficient Technologies, as well as extending the Singapore Certified Energy Manager Training Grant. All this will enhance capability, enhance technology. PUB will also continue to encourage non-domestic users to develop and submit water efficiency management plans to help them analyze and potentially save water. Let me quickly move on to households, energy and water usage. The mandatory energy labeling scheme and the minimum energy performance standards has been very effective in expanding the range of higher energy efficiency appliances on the market, making them more affordable. Quite frankly, people will save money in the medium to long run if they buy more energy efficient appliances, whether it's air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines, and the like. And we need to encourage people to look beyond just the initial sticker price, but look at the total cost of ownership. Let me move on to reducing household waste. Our recycling rate at the household, to be honest, is still not good enough. And in fact, in survey after survey, people have said they want to recycle, but for some reason, this is not translated into practice. We will continue to try to make recycling facilities more convenient for households by enhancing recycling infrastructure in neighborhoods. In some new HDB flats, we have even tried to pilot projects with dual refuse chutes or recycling chutes in order to make it more convenient. And there's some early data which shows that this perhaps may increase our recycling rates. I want to agree with Ms. Penny Lo's suggestion about trying to promote a less wasteful culture, a more sharing culture. And this concept about reuse, reduce, and recycle, it used to be in our value system. I think all of us can remember our parents saying, "Don't waste." But somehow, maybe perhaps as we became more prosperous, we've forgotten that imperative. I think in the future, the era of cheap energy, cheap resources, cheap food is going to come to an end. And we will have to rediscover the wisdom of our grandmothers of not wasting. But having said that, I also support your idea that we can promote more community-generated solutions for this. So I'll give you one example, which NEA is organizing a Clean and Green Hackathon next month. Basically, we'll have set aside a time and we'll award prizes to people who come together, devise apps which can be used on handphones and other smartphones. It's basically create platforms for people to share ideas and to use these ideas to improve the environment. Let me quickly touch in the last few minutes on a sustainable Singapore. There's just one point I want to make, which is counterintuitive. A very dense, well-planned city is actually the most sustainable way of life for human beings. Many people think being green means living in a rural area. But if you stop to think about it, living in a dense city is the cheapest way of providing food, water, healthcare, education, jobs, entertainment, ideas, and cultural exchange. Simply because you have to move around less. So in fact, the future for humankind, we now have 7 billion people. More than half of people live in cities. By the turn of the century, 80% of us will live in cities. A dense, well-planned, connected city is the greenest and most sustainable way of life for the future. And Singapore can take the lead. One key unique feature about Singapore, if you fly over Singapore, is that a lot of it is green. Almost 47% of Singapore is green. But why is it green? It is green paradoxically because we are so high-rise. Because nearly 90% of us live in apartments. The point I'm trying to make is that if you really think about sustainability in the long run, the answer lies here. And in Singapore, we are building a working model of the future. Now, of course, this working model of the future has to take into account long-term threats like climate change. You asked about, are we worried about rising sea levels? Yes, we are. We are anticipating they could go up anything from between 60 centimeters to a meter or beyond. And that's why last year we changed our platform levels for all reclaimed land. We've added another meter. So all reclaimed land now will be at least 2.25 meters above the highest recorded sea level. This is buying insurance for the future. If it doesn't happen, treat it as a sandbank. If it does happen, we're prepared, and we must, more than that, we must be prepared to adapt faster and to be aware of what is going on in science. And that is also why we have established, the Meteorological Service of Singapore has established the Center for Climatic Research, which will officially open later this month. This will collaborate with researchers from all over the world in order to spearhead studies, and their academic output, their scientific output, will be the basis on which we make plans for the future. We've initiated the first climate change vulnerability study in 2007 to give us a better sense of what's going on. This study, conducted over 2 phases, has just been completed, and we'll be embarking on the next phase soon. This will be a joint project between the CCRS and the UK Met Office Hadley Centre. So let me conclude by reiterating our core principles, that this is about human beings, our responsibility and our vulnerability, that we're all in this together, and that we have to plan for the very long term. I want to thank members of this House and all Singaporeans for sharing ideas and for working so passionately with us to ensure that this beautiful, precious, and fragile home of ours is sustainable and it will be protected for the long run. Thank you.